make sure that they are on.
Yep.
How do you tell?
I don't know that there's anybody to speak. So I will call the roll here. We have Nancy Olson, Ron DePonte, John Grega, Jan Beers, Nancy Hall, Phil Measy, Bob Geppert will not be at the meeting. So there's 6 of us, so we have a quorum. So I think we're ready to go. The first thing is to get approval of 2 sets of minutes done. The first set is the minutes from the 25th of September. That was the meeting that we postponed to in September, when we couldn't hold the meeting during the hurricane. Are there any changes or alterations to the September 25th minutes?
I didn't see any.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept them as
Motion to approve?
Second?
Second?
Okay, motion to approve, second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, I have to put an abstain since I wasn't at that.
You weren't
I
at
have
the
to
meeting.
abstain too.
Huh?
I was at the dentist.
You were at the dentist, okay, so 4 to naught with John and Nancy Hall abstaining. Next is the October 12th minutes. I have a suggested change to that. I was, if you read the set that you got, I had tried to clean up some of the stuff, but I wasn't able to 2 of the things I found very confusing. One of them was the motion, and let me just find out which page it's on in this particular set. It's the motion that had to do with the repair of the aerators. Yeah.
I think it's on page
It's
4.
on page 4. And it said on motion by Mr. Geppert, second, what it originally says is confusing, and what I think we really did was, the 5747 was CES's actual, what the proposal, but we passed a motion for not to exceed. So I am suggesting that one be rewritten on motion by Mr. Geppert, seconded by Mr. DePonte, with all in favor of the CES proposal to repair the aerators for an amount not to exceed $7,000 was approved, which I think makes it a little bit cleaner. The other piece that I didn't understand, sometimes our minute writer separates things, but the last 2 bullet items under number 10, that was a little confusing to me because it didn't even say what 2 buildings they were talking about. So I suggested that we combine those 2 into one item that said, discussion ensued regarding the flooding in 2 of the buildings in Viadana. The PWG is going to have Tetra Tech assess this problem. It has been suggested that installation of a berm might resolve the problem. And I think that's what we were trying to say. That in talking to Bob, that's basically what we were talking about there. We were talking about, we actually had, as you may recall, we actually had water getting into a couple of houses.
Yeah, those are the only 2 that...
Huh?
I understand those are the only 2 that had actual
That's
water
right,
damage in their
right,
homes.
exactly.
A couple
And-
of garages
and-
got
and
wet,
the-
but
and-
their homes.
And apparently there's there's not, they need a berm there.
There's
in order-
nothing
or-
there.
Or something there
Yeah.
to solve the problem.
Water just comes right down off the
Off the-
tees.
Yeah, right. So I'm suggesting those 2 changes. Anybody else have anything? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we accept.
Is it Viadana? Is that where that is?
Yeah, Heron 4.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's one of the Viadana, it's one of the
Okay.
It's right-
Viadana units.
Right where the cart path comes up off of Pelican Reserve Boulevard. It's that first 2 buildings there.
Right, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So I move
Yes,
we
yes,
accept
yes,
them.
I get it. Okay.
Nancy
I can
Hall
visualize
moves
it.
that we accept the minutes
I'll
as,
second.
with the changes as suggested. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Right.
Aye.
I guess we were all at that meeting, is that right? So that's
Yes.
6 to
We're all
0.
legal.
Okay. All right, got those out of the way. Okay, financials. Nancy, you want to brief us on?
Sure. Since this is the final balance sheet and profit and loss for the fiscal year, I just sort of focused on the totals this time. And on the first page, I highlighted the unassigned and the committed for fixed asset reserves, what we ended up with at the end of the year. So between the two, we have just over $4 million between the two, which hopefully will be sufficient to fund our capital asset study when it's done, but, so we're in pretty good shape there.
Yeah, it seems to me that, well, when we'll get to it when we get to capital assets.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah, I think a hunk of that, wasn't that earmarked for ponds already? Some of that money?
No, I don't think so.
Not in
Okay.
this.
No,
Okay.
no,
Not in
Bob,
this.
Okay.
Bob has, some of the 3.3 million, I think, is
Probably.
for ponds.
Yeah,
Okay.
probably.
He's got
But I don't know how much.
600,000 squirreled away someplace or
somewhere, yeah.
something, yeah.
And then, if you look at the very last page, I just highlighted our final for the year. The HOA agreement line is where all the amounts we approve here are shown on their profit, revenue and expenditures. And our annual budget was 1.185 million, and our year-to-date expenses through the end of the year were $1,060,000. So we had $124,000 left over at the end of the year. Now, we could still get a few bills when Castle Group does their year-end audit. They sometimes have some expenses that were missed, but we're in pretty good shape.
Were we gonna use some of that for the Irma cleanup?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we agree
Yeah,
that.
right.
that-
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the extra bills you're talking about.
Mhm.
Well, no, those are in addition to that. Sometimes when they do their audit, they'll find maybe a utility bill that
Sure,
didn't get
sure.
charged to us or something, and they'll give us kind of a final cleanup of the year for what they missed and didn't send over to us. So that's about it for this year.
Yeah, okay. Any questions of Nancy on that? Yeah, we're still in pretty comfortable position financially, and,
Yeah.
but we may, we get the capital reserve study, we may soak some of that up. But it also does give us funds to take care of Irma situations, which is good.
And we have no idea what the plantings will cost yet. I mean, everything right now has just been cleanup, and we're gonna have a lot of expenses related
correct.
to replacing the
Yeah.
plants.
As you recall, at this morning's president's meeting, people mentioned, are we gonna replace some of the trees, for example, that were blown over? Well, that'll be expensive stuff if we get into that,
It will be.
so, yes.
And who makes the decision as to what trees we'll replace and won't
Well,
replace?
they'd be recommended by Castle.
By Castle
And
Group.
we can then decide what we feel makes sense.
Okay.
And since this is Florida and things grow quickly, you don't have to replace it with one of a similar size, the
Right.
one that went down.
You
Yeah.
couldn't in a lot of
Yeah.
cases,
Yeah.
some of those bigger trees.
Yeah.
We just don't want little babies. We want at least something as tall as us,
I vote
maybe.
for the little baby.
I have
Sure.
a clarification question. Under Operation Administrative Services, who is that?
What page are you on?
I'm on report page 9. It's the second page after the,
Okay, yeah.
so last third of the page, Operational Admin Services. Who is that?
Those are allocations that we get from the CDD.
So we pay a certain percentage of the CDD.
So these are the salaries we pay to the CDD, our portion?
Right. In other words, that-
taxes,
that covered-
retirement
yeah,
benefits?
Remember, the CDD has a staff
Right?
and a paid staff, and that's part of what you're saying there. And in fact, the next item, we're about to get into something that comes from those two pages.
And the administrative section just above it, that's also CDD?
That's also CDD.
Yeah.
Also
That's correct.
CDD.
Yep.
And we
And keep going. The operating expenses above water management services is also a CDD allocation. Yeah. So we get, fairly substantial allocations from the CDD.
We do.
This is not stuff we're paying.
We are.
Well, we are.
We are.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, because it ends up, if you go to the last page, it ends up in our costs.
Yeah,
On the last page, yeah.
total
Yeah.
other fees and charges, it probably would be, the annual budget of 1.596 million.
Right. But it ends up in our numbers.
Yeah. It's all comes out of that money you pay on your tax bill every year. That,
Yeah, which we all just got.
Well, yeah.
Yes, right.
yeah, somewhere between 800 and $1,000, I think
Right,
it is.
depending upon where you live.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Okay, any more questions of Nancy on that? Okay, then we'll move on to, and I'm glad Chris is here. This is one that I put in, the gateway charges for legal and engineering fees. Again, if you'll take a look at what Nancy has, under administrative, there are engineering fees, you'll see, and there are also attorney fees. And then if you go over to operating expenses, am I in the right place here? There is engineering fees and attorney fees. And if you tote them up, it's about $21,000 worth of engineering fees and about a little over $30,000 worth of attorney fees. Now, there's no question, we use both the engineers and the attorneys. My question is, and Chris, maybe you can help us out with this, how are, or Nancy, maybe you can, I mean, are we actually billed these I know the CDD is billed these amounts, billed by the attorneys and the engineers. And then how does that end up on our books?
Is it as a percentage?
Typically, the administrative side on that engineering and attorney is that district engineer, district attorney function, so they're just prorating some of it back.
Okay.
But I was just starting to look into that on the billing.
Yeah.
Because Bob mentioned, he said, well, we get a bill every month for engineering. And I was like, you do?
Yeah, that's the reason that, this is what drove the question. So he's saying that for the ponds work group, they get a separate bill, is that right? Other than these allocated things? I'm very confused about how all that works.
Well,
Yeah.
The way I always understood it was that these categories are overhead
Right.
allocations. And
under
what-
the admin, right?
And what Bob gets directly
Right.
is when Tony or Danny or somebody on their staffs does something specific for the waterways.
Right, or another, like, I know they just did a task order for Tetra Tech for $2,775, and it was to have them go through and catalog all this stormwater and put it in a nice little spreadsheet for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, well, if you want the engineer to do it, fine, you want to go hire him to do that for you? And that money would probably be either billed separately, or we would look at that allocation, and then when you hit that allocation, go, hey, you're out of engineering money.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if they've done that before in the past, or whether they just went over a little bit,
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal, but we'll keep an eye on it. I could tell you, because a lot of those things are directly, and some of it may get a little in the gray area, like, I know they had Tetra Tech come out there recently because, they were looking at the slab elevations and that flooding issue in Viadana.
Mm-hmm,
if I'm
yes,
correct.
right.
So they were having them go out and have a surveyor do it, and then have Tetra Tech come up with some engineering solution, I assume, from that survey. And I was almost like, were you gonna go after the builder for this, or you're gonna go survey it? Or I wasn't quite sure why they jumped right into that, but
Mhm.
they did, so that would be something that they would pull out. Or just anything out of the usual.
Mm-hmm. Now,
And I think that's, like I said, you have 21,000 total in engineering and 30 in attorney, and I think, like I said, part of that's an overhead and others, part of it's operational.
Well, it's in both places, and that's
Yep.
my confusion.
Right.
Yeah, that's part of
That's
my
how they
confusion.
divide their budget.
And part of it is probably just the O1, the CDD for having that district engineer, so they probably take, and I'm not sure on this, they probably take a look at what they spent in the budget for having that engineer and the admin type stuff, you know, and pushed a percentage over to Pelican for that and for the attorney. I think it's
Now-
interesting, the attorney charges are more than the engineer.
Yeah. So, for example, if and I have been doing this, I've been consulting with Tony
Right.
concerning the.
Don't ask for a bill.
Huh?
Don't ask for a bill.
Concerning the safety and security work group
Right.
or charges, but our recommendations that we made here that needed legal review.
Right.
Now, is that a separate charge, or am I covered here?
Well, that's a good question. I couldn't answer it for you. I would imagine if it's operational and you're pulling him
Yes.
into a question or into an issue, I would think it would be operational,
Operational.
would be charged back, versus him just sitting up here at a board meeting or a general question you might ask him, or,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Let me ask you a related question.
Sure.
I'm on the Veterans Committee of Pelican Preserve.
Right.
And if you guys recall our last meeting, I brought up the fact
Yes.
we want to put flags.
Right.
You guys suggested I should go talk to Tony.
Right.
You say we needed to get permission.
Right.
And the answer from Tony is yes.
Uh-huh.
So he went ahead, and we've had 3 or 4 versions of it now.
Yeah.
I think you guys have the latest version of that permit.
Right.
Now, that cost him time.
Yeah.
Now, is that
That's-
the
that's a-
PPAC didn't ask him to do that. Okay?
Yeah, right.
I specifically, what I wrote to him says, I'm writing to you as a member of the Veterans Committee,
Wow.
which is not the PPAC. And he went off and did stuff, and that's okay, but the question is, how is that allocated on these dollars? I mean, he did it for Pelican Preserve,
Yeah.
but a private group within Pelican Preserve.
Yeah,
And he spent
operationally.
probably an hour or so of his time, 2 hours, I don't know, whatever. And he may end up spending more time.
Who's
So the
the,
question is, how does that get allocated?
Yeah.
What's the process for those kinds of things?
Well, I couldn't answer that
Well,
question.
that's why I'm putting it to you,
And
is
and I
as
would
you go through
imagine, I
your
would
review.
imagine, and I haven't seen anything in past years where they've gone in, like, here's the Pelican budget for 30,000 engineering,
yeah.
and then, hey, you spent 30,000, you're out, or put some more money in that
Yeah,
pot.
yeah.
Right, right.
You know,
Yeah.
I haven't
Right.
seen that happen before. I could be wrong going back and look, but when you call Tony as Pelican, that would be an operational type issue versus just the admin overhead of him being the district attorney.
But then how does he charge it back to you guys, so,
It-
and
it
then where
said-
do you put the charge?
Well, it says in his legal bills, you know, exactly what he's doing and for where, and it'll say at the top of that Pelican Preserve work.
Exactly.
But whether we're taking it and pulling it out
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
summing it, I
Well,
That's
if
what I said, this
if
was
you-
not a-
Who
this
would be
was-
doing that? Who would make the
Yeah,
decision?
Yeah, is Stephen's organization doing
Yeah,
that?
ST does the budgeting like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I would ask that Michael get together with Stephen
Find out.
and come back to us in our next meeting
Yeah, just
with a
what's the
little bit more
process?
detailed
How's it done?
discussion of how all of that is done.
And some of it is even a mystery we're getting to the bottom too, because when we look at our budgets, our categories and the way we did it, I said, yeah, but they've overspent here and they overspent there, and they said, yeah, but at the end of the year, we just make it work. You know, they pull the surpluses out of one side and the negatives out of another and balance it on the back of the utility
And-
account.
And our budget is similar. I mean, we were over in a few areas and
Yes.
under, but the bottom line, at the end of the year, we were 124,000 under budget,
Yeah.
so
Right.
we made it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But-
we'll find out about that,
Yeah.
if Stephen does it, or whether he, same thing at the end of the year, then he would give a thing, hey, you guys overspend, and that may be where, when you look at it, they go, oh, we better up that assessment next year for either legal or engineering.
So they could change, they could change the allocation for the subsequent year based on what the
Yeah.
breakdown was this year.
I would imagine that they
So-
would do that.
When you're looking at the administrative, are we billed like a certain percentage?
I think
Overall.
that allocation on the
Yes.
administrative
Yes.
side is a percentage.
It's a percentage.
Yeah, because one of the questions came up at our president's meeting today, is somebody said they heard that that percentage had changed from 7 to 9 for us.
9%.
Mhm.
And we didn't know the answer.
I think that's right.
It did?
It did go up.
When did it go up?
It was always flat at something like 8% or something, and it's gradually, as the district has expanded and hired more people, when the new building comes online, for instance, whether it's the Girl Scout building or they build their own, we're gonna have a percentage of that too, and it's gonna
Well-
go up again.
Yeah, but why should the percentage go
The
up?
percentage should
I understand
go up,
why
the
our
dollars
dollars
should
go
go
up,
up.
but why should our percentage go up?
I agree.
I mean, the Girl Scout, let's say they're not gonna buy the Girl Scout building, looks like, but if they build a new building, shouldn't our percentage of that, I understand that we're gonna have to incur expenses for that building, but the percentage that we're.
We'll have to get an answer from Bloom and see how that
Yeah.
allocation's working out.
Yeah, okay, so maybe, as I say, we could, Nancy, maybe you could work with Michael. And by the way, I apologize, I did not introduce Michael Kraft, who is the new business manager for the CDD. And we're glad to have you at the meeting, Michael. But maybe you
Okay.
can coordinate with him.
I'll give you
and-
my contact information today.
And get us some answers to
Yeah,
that.
I can find out, I'm sure it's pretty simple.
Mhm. Okay.
And if there's been any actual percentage changes there, if there have been, why?
And how they make the determination of what the
Yeah.
proper percentage is.
Yeah. Okay.
I would guess it's only get, but
No,
find out.
actually, I think there was a big go-around to do about whether Pelican was paying their fair share or whatever.
That's always come up.
And so I think there was some kind of a study that was done or analysis that was done,
Right.
and that's when it was
Determined.
raised, yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine they would use housing units or population or something like that, because I don't think Pelican contributes to like this sports complex over here.
No.
We do not.
Right.
We do not.
We were specifically exempted from that a number of years ago, about 10 years ago, I guess.
It used to be the roads too, but the roads are gone now, so.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Any other questions on this one? We need to get more answers. We're going to skip over item 5 for now to see whether Ryan Morris is going to get here. He's not here, so I'd like to move on to some of these others. Cypress Grove conveyance issues. We are struggling, I would have to say, with the Cypress Grove conveyance issues. As I think I noted in my report on the meeting, the last GSCDD meeting, the Board of Supervisors accepted Casella 1 and 2, but with some provisos about having enough money available in the bond residual in order to cover any expenses that are rightly the purview of the developer, because we don't want to get stuck with those things. Jan's done a lot of work, others have, to see areas where we shouldn't be paying for stuff. And but as I think I sent all of you a copy of the letter from Darren McMurray of Lennar, and I must admit, I'm very concerned about that letter. It sounded somewhat threatening.
I think it was more than just sounds like. It basically said, we're gonna turn everything over to the Master Association.
Which I think is an undesirable.
Bypass the CDD entirely.
Yeah, which I think is an undesirable outcome from our perspective, because if they turn it over to the Master Association, of course, they control the Master Association, so there are no checks and balances there as to what they may, what they may pass to the Master Association. Well, I don't know that it's legal, but they're gonna argue that it's legal.
Well, and it depends on what we don't know is how many hoops they have to go through, and if there are any other parties that need to be in the middle of it and so forth.
Yeah, the only other party is likely in the middle of that would be the Water Management District, because all their permits that they took out in their articles, in their incorporation documents, all say that those assets will be turned over to the CED.
Right.
So they'd have to go through a re-permitting
Well, they'd
then.
have to modify, and that can be as simple as sending in a letter and saying, okay, we modified our HOA docs, which since they're in control of the HOA wouldn't be too difficult. And send in a request for a permit bond, to the district. And I don't think they've ever seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
But whether they would carry your flag up the hill, I kind of doubt it.
I mean, I'm very concerned because I think that's a bad idea to have it turned over to the Master Association. On the other hand, I am of the opinion that some of the points that Darren McMurray made in his letter were probably valid. That we are in a position where we should, where they have the right to convey these things to us.
Right.
And we have been sending them through a lot of hoops. On the other hand, they have also caused some of the problems. I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around here, because they haven't provided information in certain cases, and they haven't done work that we think they should have done. And my personal feeling is that the CDD needs to get together with Lennar and kind of settle this thing, come up with some kind of a way to settle it. I see the Casella 1 and 2 conveyance as a possible template for doing others, and that would be that we convey them, but we ensure that there's enough money available to fix everything that needs to be fixed. And Chris has already communicated to Rhonda Brewer, I guess, that that's what we need. We need to make sure there's enough money in there for correcting everything that we find is there. And Chris, maybe you want to.
Well, that is, we met last Friday with RWA, who is the engineers on that, and they are coming up with an engineer's estimate for those other items, the same way they would for curb and final lift.
Mhm.
So they had started actually working on that on Friday. I also spoke to Rhonda, and she said, yeah, well, that's what we did at the last meeting. We offered to double the bond, of the retainage. And,
Yeah.
and I said, well, you couldn't get a vote. It was 2-2.
Yeah.
And it probably won't be double.
Mhm.
But we'll go from the engineer's estimate to do that work, and then instead of holding only 10% of that bond, they would hold the figure from the engineer's estimate.
Exactly. And it
So-
seems to me if we did all the transfers in that way, if they were withholding enough to cover the expenses that they should rightfully cover, we should be okay. And in those estimates, Chris, that included, the engineer's estimates will include things like landscaping, is that right?
Yes, it
And
should.
monuments
And
and
the monuments
the
and the
lighting
roadway
and some of the other roadways.
cul-de-sac and
Right,
curb, sidewalk.
right, exactly.
This
Yeah,
includes
and
ponds and the drainage associated with the ponds?
No.
That's separate.
That's a separate
It's
It's
issue.
a separate conveyance, I think.
Yeah.
It's separate. The drainage is separate on it. And the term you use rightfully, that's really where the problem's gonna come, because it's just like Bob said, hey, we had a hurricane and you need to go clean these storm gutters. And they're
Yeah.
like, we've cleaned them 3 times. We're not cleaning them anymore. We're
Mhm,
done.
mhm.
So,
Well, and I think some of that's gonna come down to a negotiation with Lennar as to what is rightfully theirs and what is
and
rightfully ours.
about a month ago, Lennar came in with their headies and sat down and met individually with each commissioner to try to talk through
Yes.
this. And I don't think any headway was made on either side.
No, the report I got back was
And,
they didn't get any place.
And that's, as I told Bob, and he had some consternation about it, I said, look, they've satisfied the permit criteria manual. Here's the engineer's recommendation, here's the attorney's recommendation. P-PAC has no standing, I'm taking it to the board. You guys can fight it out right out here on the record, hear what their statements are, and see what your, go to your board member and say, no, we demand this. And that's where the rubber's gonna hit the road. And so Lennar, on those things, like you said, for them rightfully to do, they're either gonna agree to do it and up the bond, or they won't. So. but-
Someone's got to hold Lennar's feet to the fire in terms of accountability. Residents were promised certain things that we never got.
Right,
My driveway curbing is crumbling since the storm.
right.
Lots of areas are like that. WCI promised many, many people,
Yeah.
you've heard this before, this is like a broken record.
Yeah.
There's an accountability issue here. And it's more than just doing the right thing, it's doing what they're accountable to do, they're responsible for. In no way should the residents have to pay for, in many areas, complete neglect, especially along Cypress Groves and the common area maintenance, and borderline crummy, I'm cleaning it up, workmanship in terms of curbs and some of the streets and sidewalks, and it's getting worse. It's their responsibility. We talked about possibly going through with someone from the CDD and me. I've got a list by street of every single issue. There's over 400 issues. Some of them are major, some of them are not as major, but they still are issues. And going through and painting them. Lennar has never acknowledged the issues that we've raised, and that concerns me, especially with the conveyance of Casella 1 and 2. That's in pathetic shape, curbs and sidewalks. It's bad, and what can we do in concert with the CDD to move this further along to the residents' benefit? I mean, we should get these repairs done
Yeah, well,
soon.
Yeah, when you say Lennar promised, is that in writing, or is that just somebody?
During the walkthroughs, a lot of residents said, here's, some chipping along the curbing. That'll be fixed before the final lift. Never got fixed. We've had our final lift in Matarita too. They did go through, and before Matarita, I think it's 3, because I never have figured out what streets are Matarita 3 and Matarita 4. They did go through, because y'all painted X's. They replaced the curbings with huge chunks of curbings that were intact. Nice job. That needs to happen for the rest of Tract L, where there are issues, and there's a lot of issues. We didn't buy into a community having it fall apart within the first year or two that we lived there, and that's exactly what's happening. I mean, WCI completely neglected the landscaping. They didn't bother to do the curb repairs prior to the final lifts. And what can we do? What are your thoughts on that? I'm passionate here.
Well, the downside, from what I heard of these arguments, was when they asked about inspecting the landscaping, and inspection of the landscaping is in the permit criteria manual, but Tyler will tell you, as a district engineer, we didn't do it, we've never done it.
All right.
We've never even looked at
But
the
RWA is gonna do it, right, for Casella
Well,
1 and 2?
we're hoping to get the landscaping plans and see, and they said in some cases, they don't have landscaping plans, they just went by City of Fort Myers minimum, hired a guy and said, go out and do it.
If I'm not mistaken, it was concluded that it is in the permit criteria manual. And
The-
even
the-
Tetra Tech agreed,
Yeah, the
mentioned that.
inspection is,
Yeah.
but on the other side, the CDD doesn't accept landscaping the way they do utilities and roadways and that. It isn't on that list of what we accept. Tony's position is, well, the landscaping's part of the roadways. And I said, yeah, well, if the landscaping's not in the right of way of the roadway, then what are you doing?
What can we do?
Well,
That's a good question. The best advice I can offer is work through your board member and have them
Yeah.
issue and have him bring it up right here in front of Lennar and see
Yeah.
what they say.
yeah, what I sent a communication to Margaret Feinberg to say that I think we gotta get a team of people together, including Lennar and including people from the CDD and PPAC, to look at these things and decide, and maybe it is the engineer who is gonna come up with a list of these are all the things that you've gotta fund post conveyance. You gotta have money in there to fund, come back and fund these particular corrections.
And what if Lennar stands up and says, here's the punch list from your engineer a year ago, we did everything, we're done.
Well, then we've got a problem.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a few issues with that, and not trying to duck out of it, but I just got involved with this when April left in the middle of June.
Yes, I know.
And this is what I inherited,
Yes,
so.
right.
But, and WCI, I think, was a little lax on their turnovers and just let it go, and then when Lennar bought it, they go, come on, let's get this taken care of,
Right.
and started pushing it along.
Exactly.
I was gonna say, WCI seemed to have a whole different
Yeah,
way of looking at it. They turned the streets over after they were built out, where Lennar doesn't feel that's the proper way to do it. They think the street should be turned over as soon as the infrastructure is done.
Right.
And I don't know which one's right. I don't know what is the norm in that industry.
Well, in the industry, their norm out there, of course, has been you fix the curbs and sidewalks when you do the final lift.
But it didn't happen.
And in Casella one, when they did the, we'll do it, hopefully we have everything marked, and I think on Pelican Preserve Boulevard, they got all those curbs taken care of in that cul-de-sac,
Oh, Cypress Grove, you mean?
just recently. They
Really?
did like 6 months ago.
They fixed the curbs going into Casella on Pelican
No,
Preserve
no, not
Boulevard?
Casella, there's.
Oh, Pelican Preserve Boulevard, oh, yeah.
And-
When the final lift was done, the cul-de-sac out by Palazzo, right?
And they had about X
Mhm.
number of curb sections that were marked
Yeah.
originally, and then when PMI came out there, they said, here's 20 more of these. So they had to up the estimate and the cost to take care of all those curbs.
Can we do that for the rest of Tractel?
Maybe,
Well, we can try.
yeah.
That's, I think we've got to try to do.
That's
When?
that's the-
When and who and how?
Well, you have to do it at the board meeting,
The
when they
board
come in there
meetings.
for the conveyance.
When they come for specific conveyance of a particular tract, we got to get in here and say, we want the same thing done that they're doing with Casella, basically, is listing all the stuff that still has to be done after conveyance that you've got to pay for.
I'm not sure that's a good template to go by. They're turning over Casella. Those curbs are crumbling. They're
They just-
falling
But
apart.
the engineer,
Casella one, this past week, they went in and fixed a lot of the curbs, Casella one. Now,
Well,
Casella
yeah, 'cause
two,
it hasn't
they
been built
done
yet.
anything over there.
Right.
Okay.
So, talking to Nancy's question, how can they convey something that's not even built?
That's what they're doing.
But the infrastructure's in, and that's when they're saying it should be conveyed, is when the infrastructure's done. The sewers are in, the streets in, the curbs are in.
Drainage is there.
They might need to be repaired down the road, but they're there.
yeah.
And
And
that's
here's
their
some money to
position.
do repairs later.
It appears to me that, they are anxious to have us starting to maintain those tracts. So we have that leverage, that we would take it over, but you got to pay for the stuff that you didn't do, that you should have done before we took it.
Now, partial answer to Nancy's question about how things are done. When WCI, just before WCI went into bankruptcy, that, we're talking about the bond proceeds at all these meetings and so forth. That's exactly what they did, was they came in and said, what we want to do is just be done here, and we will set aside, and they had Johnson Engineering do a report that said, here are the projects that are left to do, and here are the monies
To do it.
to do it. And the board said, well, that's all well and good, but, we're not sure about the quality or whatever. And so the Board of Supervisors upped it by, I don't know, 700,000, 500, something. Anyway, there was an additional amount added into it. And so they were able to conclude that transaction prior to bankruptcy. And that's how we ended up with this, if you will, fund that we've been working to fix infrastructure items and so forth. So,
Part of that, why I say work through the board, or through the engineer who does that work. And it could be problematic if they've already turned in their punch list and Lennar's taken care of it. So as far as they're concerned, by that manual, that work's done. If something happened after the fact, they aren't concerned so much with that. But in that permit criteria manual, there's no standing or anywhere where Pelican has any voice in anything. So if you get up and say Pelican doesn't like this, they're like, well, your manual says it's the board and the engineer and us. I don't care about Pelican. They have no standing in the
well,
process.
but the point to that is that any standing that the PPAC or the Pelicans have comes from the board. That was part of our charter.
Correct.
To act on behalf of the board, to make recommendations to the board about Pelican-specific matters. So it flows through direct direction from the board. So I would counter your argument with, that's where our direction comes from.
But I think, from what Chris is saying, we have to make our case. We've got to get the board to pick up our case and
Well, and
carry.
that's true, that's it.
Carry
Yeah.
the, because they've really got to carry the water.
Our authority comes from the board,
Right.
but, so it's our job to convince the board.
Yep.
And same thing with that list and things you see, and I think with Casella, the way it worked out, okay, we'll add money for the bond, and they'll send it, and they won't hold 10%, it'll probably be closer to 22%, but it'll be reflected in that engineer's estimate,
Mhm.
and then you know what you have. Whether they're gonna go on board with adding money to landscaping and some of these other things, I think it'll happen when the hearing happens.
Mhm.
I mean, you may want to go negotiate with them up front, but I don't know if that would work out any better where people are out here on camera, on the record, and making statements, and making promises, behind closed doors. It's just like the promise, don't worry, we'll fix that, okay? I don't know if it worked out so well for you the first time. And each of those tracks has specific issues, some more than others. Some of them don't have, the landscape issues, some of them do.
Right.
Yeah.
The landscape issues are really more along the common areas off Cypress Grove
Right.
and a couple of common areas within Tract L, but there weren't a lot of major issues in those off areas, but definitely major issues along Cypress Grove, and that was a neglect issue, and
I've been working there today, for the last couple of days. Juniper's been out really working.
I've seen them
Yeah.
finally trimming and stuff.
You can walk down the sidewalk now.
Yeah.
You couldn't before. The shrubs came out that far onto the sidewalk, literally. But they cleaned them all up yesterday and today. But there's still a lot to do. There's dead plants that have been dead for a year. Places they took plants out and never replaced them.
Well, I don't know if you were there, but I drove around with the Meriscape because they looked at what needed to be replaced and how much it would cost.
Yeah.
And the total cost for everything was just under $50,000. And it was, WCI told Meriscape, if the plant's dead, pull it out and leave it blank because it looks better with nothing than it does with dead plants. Maybe I'm altruistic, but that's wrong. That's just not ethical. And
Well, I guess,
I'm sorry. That's
I go back with this committee
pathetic.
to 2012, when they first asked WCI for us to take responsibility for Cypress Grove. And we had an issue with the landscaping. And Bob Geppert and I don't know who else, Gary Neubauer, went out with the engineers and walked that whole property. And WCI, as far as I remember, replanted that whole thing. And then it was just one glitch after another that Cypress Grove wasn't taken. And I think they may have even replanted once after that. It comes to a point where, I can see, they have an interest because they want to sell homes. But how many times do they go and replant when they think they've got the case ready for the supervisors to take the property before they dig their heels in and say, we've already spent $200,000 to fix plantings.
When you put plantings in, you've got to take care of them. And that's something that never happened.
That's
in
been
a-
the
in a lot of
problem.
cases.
Juniper hasn't maintained it.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
I
not
think
been
if-
watered, it's not
I'm not a
been-
big Ameriscape fan, but I think if they'd been doing it, the plants might still be alive. Because I don't think anything's ever gotten fertilized there.
It hasn't.
Nothing ever gets trimmed. So I think it's just neglect.
We need to, I think, right at this point, we need to keep pressing the Board of Supervisors on the behalf of Pelican Preserve to negotiate with Lennar
Mhm.
and get things done, what we believe they need to do.
I would like Lennar to acknowledge the data that we've put forth for them.
Well-
They're not even acknowledging it. And that's a little bit scary because that says to me, you can raise all the issues you want, we're not doing anything.
Does anyone know why they have juniper for just, I mean, juniper doesn't do very much in there, but
We're not accomplishing anything by talking
Yeah.
about
No.
whether they should have junipers here.
Yeah.
We can talk about this for
Yeah.
another hour and not get anywhere,
Yeah.
because we're not the decision
Yeah,
makers here,
right.
okay?
Yep. But I
At
think,
the next, excuse me, at the next CDD meeting, do you know if there are any conveyance issues on the agenda yet?
Yes, there are two. One's Hampton Park outfall structure, which is,
Nothing to do
doesn't
with us.
affect
Yeah.
you. And the other is the drainage and lakes for track L.
Okay.
So it's not getting into the landscape realm, and it's not getting into the road and gutter realm. And
Okay.
The drainage is pretty straightforward, and the engineer's reports say all the pipes have been fixed and all
Mhm.
that. And I assume Mr. Gephardt's gonna get up and say, yes, but we want you to clean the storm drains.
right.
And I assume that Rhonda's gonna make the same response and say it was a hurricane, we've cleaned them a couple times, we're not cleaning them anymore.
Mhm.
And
The board will have to decide what they want
So
to do.
do we
And
know
they-
if Bob's going to be there to
Huh?
talk about that issue?
Don't know, but we will find out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm scheduled to be there, which
Yes.
is fine, but if he's not going to be there, I need to get whatever information he's got.
Yeah.
So I can be prepared to respond to any
Okay.
comments that are made.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
I think it's gonna be tough, and I think in some cases you work it through the supervisors and you have those discussions on record,
Mhm.
you know, in front of an audience on tape, so whatever's said is documented.
Mhm. Well, we are going to continue pressing the supervisors, as these things come up, to make sure that there's enough money in there. Either they do it now, or they leave enough money in the pot to do it after the conveyance occurs. And I think they, from Lennar's perspective, they would prefer the latter, because they want us to take over the, work on those neighborhoods. They want us to be maintaining them. And they, I think, probably, that's, their right to do that. Okay, any other comments on that? We're still waiting for Ryan.
Yeah, he followed up with me, probably about 3:15.
3:15, okay, we keep going. The CDD water quality in Cypress Grove, I put that on there. Chris, could you, tell us what the situation is there?
Yeah, I've got some handouts, and, to frame it, it's kind of interesting, because every time we get involved in a new development, we end up getting the water quality odor issues specifically. And typically where we see that coming from is you might have something like Prado that has 377 lots platted, and they go in and put that main trunk line in for that many homes.
Thank you.
But you only have 10 homes using the water. And typically, a water utility will want to run water through a tank or through a pipeline every 3 to 5 days, just for freshness. Yeah, that's kind of a rule of thumb. So that water will get a little stagnant sitting in those big pipes. But we have been and continue to flush those lines, especially in those subdivisions that get the issues. What we have found is typically as those subdivisions build out, those water quality and smell complaints go away, because you have people using it. We had some real issues with a few units in Casella, because they would have some people at the end of the line, and there's one of the 4 units occupied. Well, the water going to the other 4, which is one line going in, no one's using the water. And I said, well, sometime you go to pull your faucet, it's not coming from the front, it's coming from the line in the back, which has been sitting there. So, and we also get those issues when we find people, snowbirds, or people been out of town for several months, they'll come back and say, my water smells. I'm like, if you leave water sitting in a trap for 4 months in your shower, yeah, it's gonna smell, and your sinks probably are too. But, a couple things that we have found out, mostly what the people complain about is they get a sulfur smell. And we've looked into it, and I have myself on like 20 homes over there, and went and talked to the people, and what we found is kind of interesting occurrence is I've had one guy say to me, your water smells, you need to do something about it. Oh, okay, go in the house. How's the water in the kitchen? It's fine. How's the water in your laundry tub over there? How about the guest bathroom? Yeah, it's just in the back bathroom, in the master bathroom, in that sink. 90% of the complaints, back bathroom, master, one sink, or in the duplex units, it's the guest bathroom sink. And I looked at him, I said, let me ask you a question, if it's our water that smells, why isn't it smelling in the rest of your house and it's only smelling back there? And he said, I don't know. And I said, I really don't know either. I know it's the longest run of piping when you see them install the plumbing. So we looked at a couple things, and I put a couple articles in here, keeping smelly bacteria or smell out of your water. And I also handed out a technical bulletin on smelly water that was actually given to a resident by a plumber working for WCI. And he complained about that for a while. And they actually came in and hypochlorinated his whole house. And he injected a real strong chlorine into all his pipe and let it sit in there 30 minutes and then flushed the house out. I checked back with him a month later, 2 months later. He goes, haven't had the problem. That's interesting. They did his neighbor's house too. And I saw the plumbing bill. It was almost $700 to do that. And then by the third person, they stopped doing it. And the only thing I can offer for an explanation at the moment, and what we found from being back there, is they build a house, they do the plumbing, they charge the piping, they fill the hot water heater. 2 or 3 months later, somebody buys the house. A month or two later, they close and move in. So that water's been sitting in that hot water heater for 3 to 5 months. It's been sitting in those lines for 3 to 5 months. Chlorine's gone, the water's stagnant, ripe environment for bacteria to grow. And one thing one of these articles mentions is what they call a BART bacteria, but it's a combination of 4 bacteria that like to grow in hot water heaters. And 2 of them are iron and sulfur reducing. So when they're in there, they'll pull that sulfur and iron out of solution. You'll get that little bit of a smell, and then sometime on your aerator on your faucet, you'll see little black flakes that'll pull it out like that. And in the majority of the cases, we've asked people to flush their water lines and to flush their hot water heater. I went over to the house myself 4 weeks ago, and the people were moving in and complaining, and I went in and I said, well, are you using any? Well, we're just moving in. And I went and checked the chlorine in the house, and it was minimal. I said, okay. I said, it's out in our line out front, it's fine. I said, so let's flush your lines for 5 minutes. Turn on all your faucets. Oh yeah, I said, no, and then the hose bibs outside, because you want to drain and run that water through. So we did that for almost 10 minutes, and also flushed their hot water heater. Filled it up. I went in and took chlorine tests at the same taps. Chlorine was up to regulatory levels, the same as in our line out front. I opened up the faucets again. I said, now, can you smell anything? No, it's gone. Well, it wasn't here, it was only in the back. Can you smell it now? No. And I said, yeah, the chlorine kills it. It volatilizes it. So, and I said, what you really need to do is flush the lines when you move in a few times. You know, keep that chlorine in the water. And I said, you'll be fine. There won't be a problem. We're flushing the lines out front twice a week now. It was interesting because this person had complained to the HOA, complained to the Alliance over there, complaining to a bunch of people. I said, have you ever called our office? No. Well, you pay us the water bill, why wouldn't you call us? And you know, it was funny, and then we got really 1 or 2 complaints over in Matarita, and then last week, I guess they had some kind of meeting, and we got 6 complaints in one day, and I said, well, good, at least the people are calling us instead of talking about it. And we're going over there and talking to them. And some of the people, when they talked about the odor of the water and the finger was pointing at Gateway, they went and bought water softeners. And I think of the recommendation of the plumbers that are working out there, $4,000, $4,500 a pop. I said, oh, you bought a system, did it help? No, it still smells. Yeah, that's exactly what's gonna happen, because now you're taking the chlorine out of the water with the softener or your carbon filter. I said, good idea. I go, but a couple times a month, you need to turn that thing on bypass and run chlorinated water through all your pipes. So, I guess the moral of the story is we hope that by our flushing, that it keeps that water a little fresher, but there needs to be water used inside that people can turn on their hose bibs. And I had one guy, he sent a thing in here and said, I use 500 gallons of water flushing, and Chris Shoemaker told me to flush my house, and I'm on a water bill credit. And I said, I'll tell you the same thing I told you when I entered the house. You have a smell issue in your back bathroom, nowhere else. I said, if it was our water that was doing this, by the way, that comes from 2 county water plants, not the water plant that you think was over by the landfill. And I said, I would be getting complaints from Gardner, from the high school, from the people over in Gateway Greens. I said, over here it's a little different because you have so few units on these big lines. I go, but the problem isn't in our line. You can go check the chemistry. As a matter of fact, that lady was complaining about the sulfur smell. I went in and I pulled samples and took them over to the lab. And she goes, what's that sulfur? And it was awful. And I said, well, here's the DEP secondary standards for sulfate right here at 250 milligrams a liter. Here's your lab report. I said, it's 72 milligrams a liter from the lab, came right out of your 2 taps there, you know, after we did that. So where's the problem? And she said, well, I had a company that came in here, and I said, well, I wanted to study a system. Yeah, they told me I said, well, let me see the report. They didn't give us a report, they just shook and had some color, and I go, it's just an opinion. If you don't have any facts for me or a lab report, I said, I'm not going to respond to it. But what I'm showing you, and you sat there and watched me pull the samples, is, and it went to a lab in a bottle, a lab report. So, and I have not gotten back in touch with her, but I told her, I said, if your water starts smelling again after you're flushing and the chlorine's up, let me know. Now, they had some other issues where they had immune system, and we can't have this in the water, can't have that. I said, look, here's all the testing that gets done through the county, and I said, we run tests ourselves every month on byproducts, and we check for fecal coliform, and then there's huge amounts of testing that are done at these plants. I said, but if you want all this stuff out of your water, I go, not from city water. You know, I said, you'd have to buy an RO system, you know, and do it that way. So I'm trying to get together and work with the residents, and like I said, ask them, especially when they just moved in, or if they've been out of town for 3 or 4 months and come back. I said, drain your hot water heater, because that's where that bacteria likes to live. And I said, open your lines and flush them, and open your hose dips so it gets everything through your house. And that seems to calm like 95% of the issues.
Jan?
What about those of us that aren't snowbirds, that have that smell probably once a week?
Right.
It affects at some point every sink or tub or shower. What about those of us? I mean, that smell is horrible.
Have you put in a work order to have somebody check your house?
No,
Okay.
but I will. But what do you say to folks like me?
I would go in there and I would check the chlorine in your house like I did there, and I would open all those taps up and flush that water through, and then check the chlorine levels and see, hey, okay, how is it? And then take a whiff. And
It's
yeah,
not
see.
all the time, it's
Yeah.
occasionally.
And if you-
And I bought those sticks that you can stick down all your drains, that's supposed to
Yeah, there's probably is in
dissolve.
your drain, and I would imagine that's another thing besides checking the sulfate. I've been running tests on that bark bacteria, and it's not harmful, but it's aesthetically not pleasing, and that bacteria is what can hold that sulfur smell.
That's bad.
Yeah. But that's what I'd do, is check it and then go over to your house and run those lines, and when the chlorine's up, just let it sit 30 minutes and then flush it again for 10 minutes.
Okay. I
If
did
you
put a
want, send me a work
chlorination
order.
system.
What
I
kind of
did,
system?
I put a very inexpensive system that's supposed to remove the chlorine from the water, because chlorine's bad for you.
Right, well, I'm not gonna argue that.
Fairfax County said, put these in. I thought, gee, if it's really bad here, I'll put one in here, and I won't have that chlorine going all over my skin
Right,
and hair.
but you have the smell now because there's no chlorine to disinfect the
It's not
water.
constant, though. It's sporadic.
And it could be it's in one part of the line, and then when the water finally moves into that sink or wherever it is. And it's also exaggerated a little bit because of those bugle-like faucets they use with those big aerators on it. You notice when you first turn those on, it's almost like suds, like that
Oh,
water's so aerated.
mine gets so clogged
And
up, I
you'll-
have to clean
and you'll
them every
get a little
month.
for like a half a second, and of course that, it's like lighting a match. I mean, it'll linger a little bit, but then it goes away.
Okay,
So-
any
I'm
other
done.
questions of Chris?
I'd say send a work order in, let us come over and check the chlorine levels,
Okay.
but by taking the chlorine out of the water, you're making your issue worse. Or leave those things off 2 or 3 times a month and flush your lines through and get some chlorine in the water, because otherwise you're gonna have bacteria growing in your water lines. And that could be harmful, not just aesthetic.
Do you charge for the service?
No, we'll come out and take
Okay.
a look at it, but like I said, I've had a couple people, and we want a credit. I'm like, 500 gallons of water, you flushed it, and you're pointing a finger at me. I go, you want me to give you $1.25 or what? But I said, the problem isn't the water in our lines. Something's going on in that house, in that hot water heater. So.
Any?
And I have all the lab results. If somebody wanted to say your line, I'll go
Okay.
out there when I'm testing their house and
Okay.
test our pipe and show them.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Chris? Okay, capital reserve study, Ron?
Yeah, hi. I'd like to introduce everybody again to Philip Robner. He's been working with me and Chris and a few other folks in trying to get this thing moved along, and it's been a long process, and we're still not quite there yet. I sent you all a updated version through Diane of the proposal, request for a proposal. I did get a very detailed response from Danny Nelson concerning how to take care of the drainage system, including ponds within the community. Very detailed. I think I sent you all a copy of that as well.
That's it.
Oh my, what copy?
That's how mine came
How
out.
did you guys get that?
That's how mine printed.
That's interesting, 'cause mine.
With all the edits on it?
Yeah.
All the edits.
Yeah, mine's the same way.
I have no idea why that happened, but yeah, I can see it in the handouts that way. Huh.
That's how it
I
printed.
don't know, I'm not sure why, but I apologize for that, but I've got a clean copy of it here.
Very confusing.
There's no way you can read that and understand it with all those changes, because as you can tell, there's been a lot of changes to this document. Okay, but I do have a clean copy, and if you want me to make copies for everybody to have, or you want me to send it to
We had it by email.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but apparently it was this
I
version.
got this
No.
in the email.
In the email, it was a clean copy.
Mine was
Oh,
clean in
mine
the
was not.
email.
Mine wasn't.
In the
Mine
email?
was not.
Mine was not either. Mine was this.
Oh, so, unless you
Maybe
want me to
just
have
resend
Diane
it.
send it again,
No.
'cause we're not gonna go through this line by line
No.
today anyway, I'll
No.
send you all a copy of it.
Okay.
Um,
And that includes the
Drainage
additions
and-
for the ponds and.
Correct. So, a couple of things, and I know you sent the note to Danny as well, John. How do you deal with this issue of whether items should be in the maintenance part of the budget versus the reserve part of the budget? We've had that discussion on and off for several months. Also, obviously, this is going to hopefully, help us resolve how much money we should be putting into reserves. Because I think we all have a sense that we're underfunded, but we don't know how much, and we all get nervous about it, and this thing has been dragging on now for like 5 months, so that hasn't been alleviated at all. So at this point, I know, Chris, you've had an opportunity to look at this. Have you looked at the part where I added the stuff on the drainage and the drainage system and the ponds, et cetera?
Yes, I did, and I think the big differentiation is, when we look at it in the utility world, is it maintenance or repair, or is it a capital, a total replacement type thing, or a new facility? You're gonna go
Right.
put in a new drainage structure versus greasing and repairing the one that's there.
Right.
So that's where we put the difference in.
Well, the question is, given the intent of this study, should we leave that stuff in here? Get some sort of an answer in terms of what's it gonna cost us to maintain the system long-term? Parts that need to be replaced perhaps every 5 to 10 years
Right.
versus something like a whole system needing to be replaced 20 or 30 years from now, like dredging, for example.
On dredging long-term,
Okay,
and
that's-
I agree with you right there too, because when you look at an aerator, what's the realistic shelf life of something like that? 5 years, 7
Yeah.
years?
But that's a maintenance item.
Right.
Correct.
It
And
can
a
be.
5 years thing is not a capital reserve.
Correct.
That's a maintenance. That should be a line item, maintenance, within a budget. And to me, if you really need a reserve, and I'm gonna use an example of a bulkhead on a pond that requires, it will last 25, 35 years. It doesn't have a maintenance issue, and you must have a reserve for it. And it's important that you reserve for something that has a 30-year life. But something that you have to constantly maintain, and I see a lot of those items in this, and I don't think that should be part of an RFP. That should just be part of a good budget.
Well, yeah, but you probably know when you have to replace those aerators versus maintaining
Correct.
them, you know, what the useful life.
But
is.
it's not a full-service thing. It would be on certain ponds at certain times, et cetera.
Right.
And you just have a good, and I think that's the way the Ponds Committee has been looking at it. I think on cleaning the street drains, a 5-year cycle is what they're looking to do. That's not a capital reserve, that's a maintenance item, that's a budgeted maintenance item. And I don't think it should be part of a capital reserve.
Well, here's the difference in our philosophy here, and Philip, please chime in. I'm not disagreeing with you. What I don't know is how much money is that? Okay?
That's part
Whether
of
you put
somebody
it
doing a
in, you
budget.
put it in a reserve, or you put it in the budget, maintenance budget, you need to know how much money to put there. So what I'm looking for these guys to do is to give us those numbers, and then we collectively decide where do you plug it into the budget? Whether you plug it into the reserve part of the budget or a maintenance part of the budget. Every 5 years, you replace 20% of the aerators. I mean, that's fine. Well, how much money is that?
But
And that's what I'm looking for these guys, to give us the numbers, and then we'll decide where to put it. What you're suggesting is don't even look at it.
I agree, because I don't think you should.
You know what I mean? Don't even look at it.
I think a
And that's
good
where we
budget,
differ.
I feel very confident. I mean, maybe that's just my opinion, that a very good budget can see where these maintenance items come from. I've talked to Danny on, let's just say, roads. You're not going to totally replace a road. You're going to do final lifts a couple times. You're going to scrape it off and do another final lift, especially in a community like Pelican Preserve. And that could be budgeted. And again, if you have to do a section of a road, it's not the whole road, because this community has been built in certain timeframes. I don't know. The best example I can use is like a bulkhead. It's a 25, 30-year life. It has to have a reserve, but it has zero maintenance during that time.
Well,
I think that from the way I've looked at this thing, strictly from an accounting perspective, is a well-intentioned board trying to put some of that information in a budget doesn't necessarily have enough information to determine the totality of the dollars. I think Ron and I have concluded that, particularly with the large items, to go to your example on the bulkhead, you know, maybe the bulkhead simply is a capital item. Maybe we agree there's no maintenance issue, and so we provide for the capital repair and the capital replacement and be done with it. In the case of some of the other things, where you're talking about aerators, which are a fairly inexpensive item, you know, how often do we need to replace those? And can we tally all that up so that we have a better idea of how much that's going to cost us or every cycle?
We already have a budget for aerators. We know what it is. What? I just see an RFP. I mean, I've done a couple consultings on, I'd love to quote an RFP like that. It would be a dream. I think it's, in some parts of it, a long RFP could cost a lot of money, and it may not be worth it.
Here's what I think with respect to the last RFP or the last study that I've seen. And no intent to take anybody to task on this thing. I think the last study was not well received by the CDD and perhaps not by the PPAC as well. And I say that because you're not using that discipline from that study to fund your reserves. In fact, at the last meeting that I attended, Phil said to me that the reserve number is basically, he didn't quite say it this way, but if you'll allow me for simplicity, it was kind of a plug to balance number. In other words, we don't have any number from which, we don't have any study from which a number is being pulled in order to create the reserves.
Philip,
So even if you're right on the way you're approaching it, the reserves need some discipline to them.
Yeah, but if I may modify what I said, we were for a couple of years using the number from that reserve study, and that's what we were moving to the reserve. This business of using the reserve as a balancing thing came up because we wanted to adjust our budget in a certain way, and so we did it that way. It wasn't the reserve driving
I
that.
understand.
We were coming in from another direction, so.
So let me go to Nancy's comment just a little while ago. We've got $4 million sitting in the reserve line in the balance sheet. We don't know what that's allocated for or allocated to. We don't know how much of that is allocated to the ponds, and ponds in old Pelican versus new Pelican. I mean, let's face the reality of this thing. When the conveyance goes down, the rest of the conveyance goes down, we're going to pick up a lot of new assets. And at the end of the day, when we start providing from a reserve perspective for a lot of those new assets, the fees from the CDD are going to go up. And one of the worst things that could happen right now is if Lennar forces the issue of a turnover and dumps all those assets onto the Master Association. Master Association hadn't even given any thought to a reserve study. So those assets, which are a part of our community, are going to be not monitored in an efficient manner. So whether we take issue with what John is saying, which I'm not taking issue with it, but I want to distinguish, to understand, if we've got an item that could be maintained, and that could extend the life from 10 to 20 years before we have to replace it, and if that's a significant issue, a significant number of dollars to maintain an asset, that we could extend that life for an appropriate period of time, we ought to know how much that costs. And an aerator is probably not a good example, because an aerator is replaced with some frequency, was what I'm talking about, you know, and it may be the stormwater thing, where we're cleaning them out 20% a year. Maybe that's our strategy, but we need to know what that number is. And maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't really know the details of that.
See, let me just add to that. We went to Bob Geppert, our ponds expert, and I've asked him several occasions, so has Philip, for his input into this. What does he think from a pond/drainage system should be in this reserve study? And the response that we've got is, talk to Danny. Okay, which we did. And we got a detailed response from Danny, and I attempted to put that in here. So going back to your comment about, we already know what these numbers are, and it's already in a ponds budget, and I'm saying, well, the ponds guys aren't telling me that.
What, did Danny say it is?
No, he gave me that detailed response that I showed you, that you sent back to him, and said, by the way, should some of this stuff be in maintenance versus reserve? And he says, yes. Okay.
He agreed with me.
You know what I mean? We agree with you.
No,
What
I-
I'm saying is, I don't know what the numbers are. And
Well,
that's what I'm trying
Can
to
I-
hope that we get out of this.
Nancy?
Yeah, I saw the first study, reserve study, and what we did with it when it was first presented to us, because it was done without setting any benchmarks or whatever. And the study that was done had a lot of things in it when the PPAC looked at it, and we said, oh, well, those are really maintenance items. But when we looked at them, we had the cost and the useful life, et cetera. And we were, I don't know how much more cost went into the development of that study, but we were able to make an informed decision about what we wanted to absolutely take out and have that be part of our maintenance budget, as opposed to something that we wanted to leave and have that be something we wanted to reserve for a long period. So it was helpful to have the information.
Yeah, John, I guess I'm, to kind of, my understanding is that the difference in opinion here is that should we know those numbers up front, the maintenance numbers that I'm talking about, should we try and get a handle?
Who's going to determine those numbers? Now,
Well,
I'll tell you.
that's the,
Your purchase order, you're going into phase 2 of that aerator project, and you're
There it
adding
is.
80 aerators, and here's what each one of them costs, so you can project out the maintenance
Right.
on them, and then you know what your capital, your initial investment is, if you want to have an R&R.
But it-
Overall, or a
You got a history
percentage of
already.
that capital, yeah.
You have a
Yeah.
history. I mean, let's even take the monuments. I mean, you're not, if you're gonna tear down a monument and redo it, fine. But
Painting.
it's just painting or redo, it's not part of a capital reserve. Even the main fencing along the,
but I don't think, if I understand it correctly, I don't think Ron and Philip are suggesting that we have reserves for that stuff.
We're not.
What they're
We're
suggesting
not.
is that we just know what the numbers are, so we know what's coming up, that we're gonna have to fund in terms of maintenance. They're not suggesting that that go in the reserve, or that we even have a reserve for that, am I correct?
That's correct.
They're just suggesting that the study should say to us, look, you're gonna have a certain amount of bucks worth of maintenance this, in the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, on these items, and this is what it's gonna cost.
Let me throw
how
another
come we
curve
not have a
into this.
history of that already? We've been here how many years?
Because we didn't have aerators before.
Let me throw another curve into this.
You didn't have
In the-
downspouts that you have to maintain before either in those yards.
Yeah, in the two contractors that we've spoken to, I've spoken to both of them, I don't think Philip has talked to the second guy. They voiced deep concern about whether they have the technical expertise to do the pond/drainage portion of what's in here, okay? So it's conceivable, unless, Chris, you have more experience about this in terms of what capabilities are out there. It's conceivable, we may have to take it out anyway, because the people that we're gonna be talking to are saying, we don't have any expertise in drainage and aerators and piping and all the other, fish traps and all these other things that are part of your drainage and pond maintenance. And we may have to take it out based on their responses to us, okay? Or we may end up go with,
A separate
two different directions. One just for the drainage system and all that stuff, and one for the other assets. We may end up having to do that. But I don't really want to leave it out now and just forget about it. That's where I'm coming from. I'd like to turn this thing over to Chris, let him go out there and go ask some contractors, hey, guy, Mr. Contractors, what do you think? And let's talk about it.
Or some other CDDs, some similar size or larger, and how did they budget it out? But a good example, you're adding all these downspouts, and there's gonna be maintenance costs, you're adding the aerators, something you haven't done, as many of them with the phase 2. And also, when you're looking at ponds, we take over more, okay, well, there's more linear feet of shoreline, and more aquagenics treatment, and more algae harvesting, and more chemicals that go in.
Right.
But if you're looking strictly at capital and long-term assets, it's the same thing. You could look at that and maybe have a portion of that capital, say 5, 10, 15% that's set aside in a restricted R&R account. So you're putting in for maintenance, but you're also putting a small, portion in for that total replacement in
That's a good idea.
25
Right.
years.
That's a good idea.
Well, like I said,
Yeah.
you hit somebody up for $10 a year for 10 or 20 years, okay, I've contributed my 200 for this $25,000 structure. It's a lot easier than going, hey, we need 200 this year
Right.
from each one of you.
Right.
And you've put away,
mean, look
taking
at-
a dollar of that
Yeah,
and saying,
look
okay,
how
here's
much
in case
money
the concrete cracks, or we need to
put
put more
on
riprap.
erosion issues,
Yeah.
right?
I think-
Hundreds of thousands of dollars we
Yeah, I think
put out
if you-
there. And that's gonna have to get redone eventually.
If you look at what happened in Gateway with regard to their ponds and their lack of maintenance over a long period of time, the fact that nobody was paying attention to it. Remember, we're as committee members, we're only here for a short time. We've got to pass this on to another group of people. I mean, perhaps you're going to serve forever, but maybe some of you want to get off and put somebody else on. The problem that I see is being able to do this long-term, the burden needs to be on the staff. The burden doesn't need to be on this committee or on the CDD, either one. I mean, ultimately, they've got to approve the budget, but the burden of execution belongs to the staff. The staff needs to be accountable for these types of things. And I think what happened in Gateway is a real shame. I mean, and I don't think it's been communicated very well. I don't know that those kind of issues exist in Pelican Preserve, per se.
Yeah.
But the responsibility for being able to get this up and running, for instance, one of the items that was on the old reserve study was the roads, the replacement of the roads. And to John's point, we're never going to replace the roads all at one time. But
That
the
doesn't mean it's
question
not a
is,
capital item.
the question is, how much money do we need to allow on an annual basis or a biennial basis or whatever the schedule is to repair roads to make sure that we've got the roads in good shape? And I don't know that we do have those numbers. Now, aerators are pretty simple.
That road thing's an easier number, though. I mean, that's,
But
It's
those
an
costs
easy number,
change
but you
over
gotta add
time,
it
too.
to 15 or 20 or 30 other numbers in order to be able to have all the dollars. Yes, ma'am?
Nancy,
You're coming at this from an accounting perspective.
Also, by the way, I've done a number of reserve studies, so
Yeah.
I'm not inexperienced in reserve studies.
So my question is, when you're looking at accounting principles, aren't there guidelines there that says what's an expenditure and what's capital that, I mean.
Sure
there's-
there are.
yes.
Sure
That
there
we should
are,
be
and that's
looking
not,
at?
and that's really not at issue in my discussion in terms of this.
Okay.
This isn't a matter of doing, you can make a decision from an accounting perspective that you're gonna write off everything that cost under a certain threshold.
Right.
That's the same way you let some of the bills get paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
You give your staff a threshold to make those decisions. You do the same thing with maintenance items. But capital items, maybe the capital items are, nothing less than $100,000 or less than $200,000. So whatever number you feel comfortable with is the one you use.
So when we're looking at roads, we've got a lot of roads. I don't know how many miles of roads we have in Pelican. And we might not have to resurface any of them for 10 years. But shouldn't we be putting money aside every year until it's time to start resurfacing some of them? Instead of waiting to 8 years from now going, oh, Pelican Reserve Boulevard from here to here needs to resurface, so we're gonna charge that this year.
Well,
To
that's
me, the
what-
roads are a capital
But that's what
item.
Chris was saying. Some of that money doesn't go into a capital reserve, it really goes into a maintenance reserve. It's the same concept on the balance sheet. I mean, it's a bulk of assets. I mean, when people look at the CDD balance sheet and see $4 million, they say, golly, we got an awful lot of money. Well,
Because
the
we don't
reality
have
is,
it
we don't know
allocated.
we don't know whether that's enough or not.
We don't, no.
And we're fixing to take on, I think, if not doubling the size of the assets between Phase 2 and Phase 3, we're going to at least double the number of assets that are already on the books of the CDD. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say it's fair, and also every one of those assets that's conveyed to the CDD comes with a bill of sale. So when you take over Casella, I get a whole listing with the bill of sale that says this number of 12-inch RCPs, this structure's in the ponds, this many linear feet of pavement, curb. It's all right there for a starting point and a capital value, and then you kind of have an idea. How many linear feet of road do we have?
Well, that's one of the things that Chris and Ron put into the RFP, so that we have control of the data. In the old system, we really didn't have control of the data. We've been over to the gentleman's house that prepared it. It's on his computer.
yeah.
And given my age and given his age, I know that some of us aren't going to be around long-term to deal with that. So we've got to have control of the data, and we put that in the RFP so that, again, not only have a starting point, but we've got somebody on staff that has control of this information to be used in a future time for a future committee, future board, future work group, whatever you want to call them.
So,
So,
yeah.
to the board, and I have no problem if you want a clean copy of this rather than this marked up copy that ended up in your email, to look at it. But I propose that we turn this over to Chris, have him go out to the contracting community and see what kind of responses we get. Now, if you want to wait until you guys have had another opportunity to look at this, I mean, that's fine with me.
I will
mean,
tell
that's
you
your call.
honestly, from my point of view, I'm not going to be able to improve on that. on
Well, I
what you've done.
did get your comments, and they've been incorporated
Yeah.
in this version.
And
But I haven't, like in John's case, if he's looking at this marked up version, that's almost impossible.
It was.
One of the changes did you make on is the date you want it returned to, because you had October.
Well, no, it's now November.
You
I
probably-
had the And Chris will change the date, obviously,
Yeah,
depending on when he
that
sends
probably
it
needs
out.
to be changed.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've changed it 3 times. It
Yeah.
started in
That was one of
September, it
my
changed in
comments.
October, and then
Yeah.
this is now November, so yeah,
And we can-
it'll change 3
We can
times.
put that out on the street, and then you pick your top 3 vendors and come in and have them make a presentation to you. Then at that point, when you hear what they say, you can kind of fine tune it. Hey, we want to go with this guy, but we want him to change this, this, and this.
Yeah.
That's a good idea,
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yes.
That's,
Then when you hear their
exactly.
different approaches.
Yeah,
and-
because I'm a little concerned about some of their ability to go through this pond/drainage stuff and actually have the expertise to give us something that's worthwhile. We might have to go to 2 different contractors. I can see that as a possibility. And then I'll turn it over to Bob Geppert or John Greger to take care of the pond stuff.
I'm not on ponds, I can't be on the same committee as Geppert.
But
I just see it, it's a very long RFP.
No, not really.
I mean.
It's really not.
No, I don't think it's
Because
that
it's in
long.
3
It's not.
phases. A lot of it's repetitive.
It's very comprehensive, I
Yeah,
think.
it's
And-
very
and-
repetitive.
But I think what I'm hearing, with perhaps with the exception of John, that what we want to do is we want to have information that provides both for truly capital expenditures.
All right, if that's what this is saying.
And maintenance.
Well, this doesn't make the determination of what is one thing or
What's
the
the
other.
other?
It's a, give me the numbers, and then
Yeah.
we'll
We'll
make the
decide.
decision at, our level
Yeah.
versus the contract. He can make recommendations, don't get me wrong, we want him to do that,
Yeah.
but we're the ones making that decision.
But even if it's maintenance, we're still gonna set up
Yeah.
reserve
Sure, we-
for
Yeah,
maintenance.
well, it may be, like I said, what do you call the account?
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
fine, I mean, that's for the
You
accountant
just have
guys
two
to take care of.
capital
when you
accounts
put it.
rather than one.
Yeah, sure.
Do,
Yeah.
do we want a final copy to come to the P-PAC too? Or just to the CDD?
P-PAC. Final copy of what?
The,
Reserve report?
Yeah.
So it should come back to you.
That should come back.
because it says it's supposed to go to the CDD.
Well,
Well, the CDD is acting as the collecting point for
Yeah.
taking it.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna go to
It's a
him, he's
CDD
gonna give it
staff.
us.
Just checking,
Yeah.
just checking.
Yeah, no,
Make
you're
sure all the
right.
boxes.
You're right.
check.
If I can make
Yeah.
a comment too, we have an RFP out right now for an assessment methodology, on how these assessments are done, because it's being done the same way it's been done for 25 years. And a couple things came up, like we looked at using that assessment methodology to help create a stormwater utility. Say, okay, we can move all our existing money into this budget, and now if you want to clean storm drains, how much is it? Does it, and then it's very transparent instead of being lumped in. But another thing we may want to bring you in for some discussion is how are those allocations between P-PAC, Pelican, and this master CDD accomplished? Is there some kind of ratio? How did they do that? And that's something we may want to bring into the consultant to address, or at least look at that. I had people that say, well, why the people who had this ponds work done, I think they should pay more than me, because I don't live on a pond. And I said, well, it's all the same stormwater system, that's our justification. I'll be interested to see if the property appraiser increases the assessment on those houses in Gateway Greens because of the improvement behind there. It's their land, it's an easement, but the easement was improved. Maybe, maybe not. Well, you never know.
Yep.
Yeah, if you look at what was done behind those houses at $140 a linear foot, maybe they'll just ignore it because it's, the pond and there's an easement over it. But that's one of those things that we're looking at is equity and also commercial. With some of this stormwater, they just take the top floor of, say, a Gardner building. And that's where the assessment is. Well, they have some huge parking aprons out there. What about the water that comes off, and why isn't that linked to some kind of assessment? But just, again, looking at the updating it, making it more transparent. But I think that's something we may want to include is when we have the meetings with the consultant, talk about the breakout and that split, because it is an assessment, and how is it done? I doubt it's rocket science the way they've come up with it on here. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see any background papers that say, here's the percentage and it was X units divided by this, or did someone just say, yeah, this looks good? 7% looks good.
So, I make a motion
Sure.
that this RFP be turned over to Chris Schumacher to go out and get some response from contractors.
Oh, you can second.
All right?
Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's 6-0, unanimous. I think you voted for it. didn't you?
Yes.
I second.
Seconded, I think you should vote for it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have to
Based on Chris's
leave,
comment.
Yeah,
because I've got a Veterans Day
Oh,
walkthrough
yeah.
that I'm in charge of.
okay, Mr. DePonte is.
So I just wanted to make one
Straight-
more
Oh, yes,
comment.
let's-
I just
yeah,
want
do
to
we-
let
do
you
we-
know,
Yeah, do we need to approve this in any way?
no, I don't think you do.
No,
I don't
okay.
think you do.
Okay.
This is, based on suggestions from the committee, I went to Tony Pierce to find out whether putting American flags along Pelican Reserve Boulevard requires approval by the CDD, and the answer was yes. We've had 3 versions of the permit done. It may change again, so that's another reason why not to do any voting or anything. I don't think it's necessary for you guys to do that. Mr. Guy was more than willing to bring this forward to the supervisors. But I wanted to let you know where we were, okay? And I mean, Tony was into having to do sightline surveys done by accredited engineering
What?
companies, and it's
You were
like.
just talking about little wooden stake flags.
Well, in the beginning, I didn't want to commit to something, it could have been a full-size flag, and he's got into all the sightline studies by engineers and stuff like that. So we backed off of that and said, okay, we're just gonna put little flags out there. And I think that'll be approved, but I'm talking to our committee this afternoon to make sure they don't want to. Because you notice there are some large flags
Yes.
Yes.
out there.
Yes.
And nothing to do with us.
Tunnels to
Okay,
towers,
that was
yeah.
the Tunnel to Towers folks who put them out there.
Ah,
Oh,
And I'm not even gonna say any more because the CDD will get upset potentially.
Ron,
So-
my
This
understanding is the Constitution says you do
No,
not
listen,
need permission.
If I'm gonna put a flag on your property, should I ask for your permission?
If you're going to put it on my property?
Yes.
No, I'm fine with that. Go ahead.
But I had to get that response, didn't I?
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
that's what this
Okay,
is.
okay,
And
well,
remember,
Okay.
this is the same group that got
How
the
could
sale
the
signs
CDD
taken out of
Yes,
Pelican. so
yes. Like I said, because of that is why I brought this up to you guys to begin
They
with.
weren't approved.
but you're gonna go just directly to this, without,
Yeah,
without.
yeah, I
without
just
us
wanna
having
let
to
you know
pass
what's
it.
happening in case it comes
Okay.
up and whatever. And I'm supposed to be at the next CDD meeting, all right?
And you're paying for Tony's,
I'm paying.
you're paying
Yeah,
Tony
right,
direct?
Yeah, right, yeah, I'm gonna get a direct bill from Tony. Yeah, sure. All right, thank you, I have to run.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Straighten out the flags, couple were approved.
right.
DePonte is departing the meeting. Okay, we're gonna go back,
To towers, people.
we're gonna go back to item 5, and
I don't know who they are.
we'll ask Jason to step forward
What they are.
to talk about the proposed emergency plans. And Ms. Bierce, you were one of the people who felt that we needed
Yes.
to do a lot on, that we needed to bolster the actions that either Castle or Securitas take
Both.
in an event like this. So I guess I would start by asking about your comments on their proposals.
I did go through everything. First of all, thank you both for submitting something. I think it's quite comprehensive. And I haven't had a chance to go through every single line, but we'll start with the first one from Castle. It may already say this in here, but help me out. My understanding from this is someone will be on site from Castle up to 36 hours, depending on the severity of the storm, before it's vacated. And when they leave, they're leaving a bunch of emergency numbers and some focal point for coordination with the residents of Pelican. Am I right?
Just want to read what you're reading.
Well, those are my retake on it. Maybe it was.
My sense is that maybe we want to be more explicit about that.
Yes,
That-
it's not
that-
in here, maybe that's where I'm a little, I've had an awful lot on my plate lately, so,
I think, Jan, if I heard what you were saying at the last meeting, your concern was that people were out there not knowing where to get information about what was happening in the community. Was that the issue?
that's not quite, and it's not
Yeah.
my issue, it's, I'm
Well,
just
I understand.
representing the
I
issue of
understand that.
several.
I understand, but the issue that you presented.
Quite a few people were upset that on Thursday, 72 hours before the hurricane came, we had no winds, we didn't have any signs that we were going to get anything. Lennar, Council Group, and Securitas locked everything up and left. So a lot of people were putting hurricane storms up. I, for one, didn't have enough hurricane shutters. That Lennar has come back and said, yes, that was inspected. It's not there. Anyway, there were a lot of questions that people had, and we had nowhere to go, no one to contact. Everything hit, all of our support system, all of our services that were provided vacated 72 hours before the storm hit. And a lot of people were really upset about it. And I come from an area where we had a lot of storms, and there were always good contingency plans. Our former property management company, when we had Snowmageddon, he actually, I don't know how he got there, he was on our property while it was storming to make sure that people, I mean, it was hard to get in and hard to get out. They couldn't keep the snow out fast enough, but they were there for the residents. And a lot of people are upset that, especially Securitas, who took the guard, I mean, anyone could come in for what, 5 days? And we didn't, no one told us that everyone was abandoning the community. So a lot of people are upset, and
So-
that's why I raised it.
Okay, so what is,
I
that's what
wanted
you
an
were-
a contingency plan
Yeah.
for, in the event that something like this happens again, what security offers can you propose so that we're not abandoned so far in advance of a storm? Understand, individuals' safety is a primary concern for everybody, including service companies. You have a contract to provide services, and we went without services for 5 days. So what can we do to make sure that that doesn't happen again?
Well, I guess, do you have a suggestion of what kinds of things they ought to do?
Well, some of the responses I've gotten from Castle were, when we're told to evacuate, we'll evacuate, and that's, I'm sorry, that's just not going to fly. There could be, you could let some people off earlier in the week than others to prepare their homes. You can operate on a skeletal crew. You can have a key emergency crew assigned to rotate shifts to stay at or be in contact with the community. Carol Borkey's the only one, and she's a resident, who kept us informed and helped people out when they needed it. And she worked nonstop before the storm and post the storm and during the storm.
Just to touch on one thing on what you said, I do know that they have specific timeframes listed as far as when they will leave and what conditions and under what different items. In regards to Castle leaving on Thursday, it was not our intention. Lennar shut down the sales center, which is where our offices were, which is why we were not in those offices. We didn't know we were leaving until that day, when we were notified that they were sealing up that building. As far as communication, absolutely, I agree. Better job by me to get emails out. Unfortunately, I didn't have the capability, but that's something that we're working to have a system where that's not a problem.
Right.
Another thing that we've thought about doing, I need to look into as far as costs and things like that, perhaps we could set up a phone number where people can contact that gives that we can put recordings into giving updates. There are things that phone systems provide to do something like that as a secondary option for them.
It
And
might be
as far as
challenging if we
getting-
don't have power.
Yeah, and that was a big issue as far as getting the information out. And then, but that's, not your problem because I couldn't get there.
I will make a suggestion to Castle,
Certainly.
that if you ever get kicked out by Lennar again, please feel free to ask for permission to use one of our meeting rooms in the town center, because it would have been a welcome opportunity, as far as a lot of us are concerned, to have you stay on the site at least until Saturday at 6 PM. Because we really didn't start feeling the effects of the storm until.
Right, and we wouldn't normally have been there after Friday.
You would have been there through Saturday?
We would
No,
not.
Oh.
they're out
They're not usually
Friday
there.
Wouldn't have been
afternoon.
there
So in
on
a storm
Saturday.
situation,
I
and
mean,
you
we were
guys-
still all working, I can guarantee you that. I know personally, I mean, everyone was still working and doing things behind the scenes, and we had people back on property the following day. That's another thing that we're gonna be doing. You're gonna start seeing magnets on vehicles, so that people do see a presence out on the property that we've been told is non-existent. And it's just, it's not the case. You know, that's another thing, so that people do see us. Or they'll know that that's who we're with, because otherwise, you know, someone in a vehicle, you're not gonna know what we're doing.
Could you have used a meeting room, or did Lennar start closing up the town center also on Thursday?
I believe they went home as well.
They closed the
I do
town
not recall.
center.
I believe so, yes.
So they closed the
Yeah,
town center
everything that
and
they
the
had
sales
was
center.
Shut down.
Mhm.
So that wouldn't have been an option beyond Thursday either then.
well, not as long as Lennar controls it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's no other safe building for them to use there, so there wouldn't have been a place for you to work on site.
In all honesty,
Yes, ma'am.
from my perspective, and it's just my perspective only, I think it's very challenging to, during a hurricane, and we were expected to get a 5, we didn't, to stay during the storm. I kind of get that. Even the fire department, police said, if you have an emergency, we're not going to be able to respond because we're not going to put our staff
Yeah.
in jeopardy. I get that, and I agree with that 150%. But my concern, on behalf of the residents that have called me, and I'm still getting calls, is that everything just shut down 3 days before the storm even hit. And that was, and I agree, unacceptable. So, I appreciate your looking.
I mean, at what point, so is it just a matter, you know, and you need to understand this, is it just a matter of that complete shutdown, rather than occurring 72 hours in advance, occurred 24 hours in advance?
I think depends on the severity of the storm, and I looked at Securitas's numbers, and they're like, if the winds are over 30 miles an hour, but tropical storm winds start at 39, so I'm not sure why there's that difference. Yeah, I think it depends on the storm, when it's going to hit. I mean, this one was fairly slow-moving. I think it's got to be taken on a case-by-case basis, but just to peck, and I'm sorry that Lennar did that. I wasn't aware that they ordered that. Just to leave us.
I think a recommendation is if there is a way to have, like, your office in that sales center is pretty sheltered compared to the rest of the building. If there would have been a way to keep you there.
We would have fed you. We would have fed you.
No, seriously,
Another day.
just, at
We
least,
were not given the option.
at least through Friday.
That was, we had no intentions of being gone Friday.
But as long as we can make contact by phone, I don't think we need the physical presence. We need to know there's somebody we can get a hold of.
In
an
case something
emergency.
happens and we need them prior to
Instead
the
of just
storm,
a
not during
recording
the
saying,
storm.
we're
Yeah.
not here.
And we do have our resident services, which is a 24-hour line, which is run off of the other coast. As long as our computers are working over there, you know, you'd be able to reach someone just like you would, which is in place all the time.
And this storm was so big, it might not have mattered where you were.
Yeah, well, it covered the whole state.
Yeah.
So,
As long as our servers are up and running over there, the customer service line is available.
So maybe it
And then
would be
they-
important to
they
get that
track down
information out.
The manager.
Like right before storm, maybe that's a piece of information that needs to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
out.
what kind of
there.
What are-
information to be
This
disseminated?
is-
What are the
Lord.
key pieces of information then that we need to get out?
I think
I think this list
Yeah,
is excellent,
yeah.
but I hope we're not the only ones getting it. Didn't I see a note come out to everyone with this information?
What are you looking at?
The
The
numbers,
emergency
Lee?
numbers for Lee County? You should top this list with an emergency contact for Castle Group?
There's actually something like that that's going to be disseminated to all of the presidents.
It should go to all the residents.
it should go to.
Sure.
the rest.
It should, not just the presidents. It should, some presidents are really good at communicating. Ours is good, but we don't get all the information. So it should go to all the residents before the hurricane hits. When it's imminent that it's going to hit Southern Florida. Send it out.
There is an emergency list that is sent out with the hurricane preparedness, but that will be, the new one is going to be updated and included with that, which I will send as an attachment as well. So
Okay.
that is included to every resident.
I
Because I think
think,
that's a good idea
I think
also.
Yeah, thank you.
it would be helpful also to have the, obviously, Lennar and Castle Group had a hierarchy of who was where and who might come, or who would be in charge of telling people to show up or not show up or whatever. I think it would be helpful to know, for the residents to know, that there is a person who would be directing people, and that the presence would be back on site, physical presence would be back on site the next morning or whenever, something.
Our directive from Castle is as soon as it's safe for us to do so. And now, one thing with Pelican, one thing to remember is, with the exception of myself, for the Master Association, we only, our other managers that are there on site all the time, but we only manage a small portion of the communities within Pelican Preserve. So you're gonna have
Right.
18 other associations that, I don't wanna say it like this, but aren't our responsibility, so they're not gonna, have the response from us. We can't guarantee that, not that we wouldn't assist there as well. But as far as presence from their property management companies, that's something they would have their own
Well, I
individual
understand that, no, but
plans.
just so, to know what,
Mhm. Ours, like I said, as soon as it's safe, our directive is to be back on site. As soon as it's safe for us to do so, deemed safe.
Okay.
I mean, like, and
So just
Jill-
on
Jill
top
was
of
out-
this-
Jill was out there the next day. She was out right after the storm because she was able to get there. She has a large truck. She was able to get through the community and get there. It took me 4 days.
So
I
Carol
couldn't
was
get out of my
doing emails through people's cell phone numbers.
Sorry?
Carol Brocky was doing emails and texts through people's cell phone numbers. And I left. I went to northern Orlando. Actually, I hit 15 miles from a couple of days later, but that was really so helpful to me, being far away. And, she said, we still don't have power, don't come back, it's horrible, every street's flooded. So all that kind of information just being disseminated in a timely fashion to the residents really helps.
I don't disagree with that.
So I'd like to see someone's name on this contact list.
But you have to remember Carol lives in Pelican Preserve.
Right.
And so she could be right there on site immediately, where, like
And
Jason
these
just said,
folks-
it was 4 days, and I know Greg was about 4 days too before he could get out of his,
Yes. Yeah, he
his
was
house.
flooded in also.
They-
That's
They were completely flooded
Flooded
in where
in.
they
A
lived,
lot of
so they
people
couldn't
were.
get out. And so they're not on site to see what's happening, and you can't expect them to be a miracle worker and.
well, and I happen to live next door to Carol, and I know that the only reason Carol was able to get out and about is one of our neighbors had a son
Big
staying
truck.
with them, who had a giant big truck
Yeah.
that she commandeered, because otherwise Carol never could have done that.
And Carol also had to use other people's homes that had generators so she could charge her cell phone and everything to get it out to the community. It was a community effort. We had a 25-year storm 9 days before, and then a 100-year storm. We learned a lot. There are things to resolve, but, and I have to give everybody credit. The people that were here were
phenomenal.
fabulous.
They were phenomenal.
And, even in the end, everybody pitched in to do what they had to do.
And I would agree with you, John. The only point we're making here, I think, is that we want to see, are there things we can think of in advance?
Right.
That
And
we
it's-
learned from that
we learned from
storm,
it. I agree.
that we could possibly do to just improve things.
And I agree.
That's it.
Well,
Right.
That's exactly
One,
it.
one quick comment, since we're looking at the emergency numbers here. Do you have the CDD here and an emergency contact at the CDD?
I can give them Chris Shoemaker's name and number.
I think that that's
And that
a,
didn't help us much because we had power in the building, but the internet was down, so we had no phones.
Ah.
We couldn't make
That's-
outgoing calls or any.
There's not much you can do about that.
Well, it's a rare situation. I'm not complaining. Don't overdo this. I just think we can improve and learns better how to handle something like
But
this
I still
better.
want the CDD information on here. It needs to be here.
Okay.
But, but in my
I don't know that
neighborhood,
that's gonna
I
be-
emailed the whole neighborhood who's going to be here during the storm, so that after the storm was through, if we'd had a lot of damage, we would know each home that had somebody that stayed. And maybe each neighborhood has to do something like that for their own neighborhood too.
Well,
So
we,
that-
we did something similar and also identified people with special needs.
Yes. Mhm.
We didn't do anything like that.
Shayna.
Well, because, I mean, you're a new I mean, you guys just turned over.
A year
I'm sure
ago.
nobody would have thought to do this at that point in time, but this is a good lesson learned, that maybe at that more local level of your own neighborhood is where you need to start.
I don't want to belabor this, but I do want to look at the Securitas
Brian?
document. So I'm a little confused. You do talk about leaving and shutting everything down when the winds hit 30 miles per hour. Tropical storms start at 39, so I don't understand the reasoning behind that. And security is a big thing for Pelican. Pardon? Access control is a big thing in Pelican. Thank you. The gate's down at 2 o'clock on Thursday.
Right, and again, that was, we were requested to leave the site. They were closing down the gatehouse, they turned off the power, they boarded up the doors and windows.
Who
at the
did?
location.
Who told
Lennar.
them?
And again, we could have stayed later. However, we would have had the staff members standing outside with no supplies, no shelter.
Well, wait a minute, the
just
CDD
outside.
owns that building.
Yeah.
It doesn't
And
even do with Lennar.
And
It has
Lennar was the
nothing
one?
to do with Lennar. Lennar never should have given you,
But Lennar was the one that shut it down.
Well, let me rephrase it then.
Yeah.
The building was boarded up at that time. so
By
we-
whom?
We no longer had access to the
By
gate.
Lennar?
That was a decision that Ryan and I coordinated the Thursday decision based on the fact that Lennar was closing down everything else, and Wesley, being part of our team, he's the one that actually took care of boarding up the gatehouse. So not to throw Lennar under the bus when not necessary. That is the situation. That's what-
I would make the following suggestion. Chip in at will. I would like to see both Securitas and Council Group approach Lennar and say, we have a responsibility here. And instead of closing up 72 hours, we would like to have a contingency plan to stay open as long as the conditions are safe for our employees and our equipment. And I'd like to see what Lennar says.
so I didn't get out to the gatehouse while it was quote boarded up, but in fact, it was, you just boarded the windows, the doors and so forth.
The glass was protected, yes.
Why don't you have
The entry-
hurricane glass in there?
The door and the windows had, I believe it was plywood. Wesley had
They
put
did
up a-
plywood on it.
Why not have hurricane-proof glass
Exactly.
and doors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, homes have, we have that here.
It's our asset, Ron, we have to
Not
make
all,
that
but-
decision.
So
But
I
we can
think-
talk about that for the
I think
next.
that's something that we put on
thing.
our list to talk about, because
Yes.
I agree that closing up the gatehouse is a decision that, if it was made because it was a need to board up the windows and doors, that there's got to be a way to make that a better decision.
Well, I would like to see you both approach Lennar. I don't know how you do that. And just say, look, in the event of another hurricane or a storm, we are service providers for Pelican. We would like to remain on site as long as it remains safe for equipment, buildings, and personnel.
But
And they'll
was it,
probably tell us that it's fine if we want to stay on site, but they're still going to secure their facilities.
but
Well-
this isn't
But
their,
I
fac-
would be
Not-
happy to ask them.
Not the gatehouse.
but the gatehouse is
No,
not
the
their
gatehouse does not
facility.
belong to them. You're right.
In that case.
Well, that's going to be cozy for you guys, if you both have to hunker down in the gatehouse.
Well, in that case, being that the CDD owns the gatehouse, there's definitely recommendations that I can give you to have that gatehouse operational much longer and closer to the storm, as opposed to, boarding it up with plywood. Yes, if you put up the hurricane-resistant glass and doors, you no longer need that time to board it up. You can simply lock the gatehouse, so you can remain there much longer. You can utilize a generator to keep the power on to the facility. That again helps facilitate maintaining normal operations.
Well, you have
So-
to take the arms down.
Right,
They're not
exactly.
gonna survive winds at
That's,
35.
But at least-
but that's typically the
24
last thing
hours.
that we do.
Yeah, that would give
before
us-
we
yeah.
Yeah, so Brian,
Absolutely.
Brian, could you give us, a proposal of things that could be done to? Hmm?
And Brian, why would you not know that that's not owned by Lennar? That it's a CDD property?
The gatehouse.
We didn't, that wasn't in question.
You just didn't know?
No, it wasn't a question of whether or not, I
No,
know. it was.
he mentioned, Brian mentioned he didn't. know.
Ryan?
Well, they don't have a
I-
right to shut
I
it
do.
down.
I know that it's ours.
Oh.
Yes.
If people have to evacuate or they tell them to be out 3 days, then who are you gonna get to man the guardhouse if people are evacuating?
Well, that should be up to the service providers, both Castle Group and Securitas, to do skeletal crew, emergency crew, whatever, until it no longer is safe. You want to get them out in time to get home to safe conditions with their families.
And we're doing usually the opposite when the storm passes. For example, we had 4 of our officers on 12-hour shifts covering the majority of the week after it had passed until remainder of our staff could come in. One thing that I, like to remind folks is a lot of our staffing does come from areas where they were trapped at their
Oh, sure.
homes for
Sure.
5, 6, 7 days.
And we understand
We
that.
understand.
Get
We
that.
were-
We get
We were
that.
trapped as well.
And one of the things that we can look at as well as, if need be, we can pull resources from our emergency staff, where we'll take people from Atlanta or Texas and bring them in to provide staffing as well. We did that in Houston. I had a team from Fort Myers leave to go to Houston.
Really?
And vice versa. Houston folks then came back over here after the storm to help us out as well. So we can look at putting
Wow.
those things in too.
Those are things, I'd very much appreciate seeing your recommendations for how
Yeah.
we can make it better.
Really good.
Absolutely.
But,
That would really help.
but some of that
Everyone.
also could be part of what you're putting here, the bringing the teams in and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and the generator was an interesting thought too,
Yeah.
because that would allow you to get up and running the next day, where
Charge
we
cell
were without
phones.
power for, 3 days basically, that you couldn't operate anything. At least we would have had the gate security working.
If you got homeowners that have generators, why not a security?
Yeah.
Right. And the locations that we have installed the generators at, the residents really do appreciate that. Even if it's something minor and the power just goes out in the neighborhood, they're coming back through, they see that
There's
the
no
lights are on in the
security.
gatehouse and someone is there. That gives them a greater sense of security.
Right.
Even if they are just doing basic access control, it does provide that benefit.
Be
Awesome.
also aware too that we have natural gas there. You do not need a generator run by gasoline, which sometimes is in shortage in a storm.
Well, I don't know what, at the gatehouse.
Well,
No,
there
no.
is gas lines that
front
they could
area.
tap into.
Yeah, in the front of the front neighborhoods are the ones that have
Sure.
gas. Yeah.
You have it.
That might be
So
an
look
easy,
into
it might be an easy
generator with
thing, so.
natural
yeah.
gas.
Phenomenal.
You
Okay.
might have it.
You might, yeah.
The line is close enough there, they could tap into it. I mean, I'm not sure, I don't care if it's 100 yards, it's there.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you both.
Part of the proposal, we'll let you look at that.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay.
Thanks so much for paying attention to this.
Okay, no problem.
That was a lot of work in a short period of time,
Yeah.
so.
It was,
Yeah.
yes, because
Absolutely.
Did a good
Well,
job.
yeah.
we all
Okay.
learned.
Yeah.
You know what? We're gonna have all this in place and we're not gonna have another storm for 25 years.
100.
Okay, thank you. Jason, you have,
I have one other item, yes.
yeah, okay.
Excuse me, and that is also hurricane related. There was one decorative street lamp that was, would need to be replaced, should you choose to do so. It was on the west side of the four-way stop in the median. Replacement cost is $9,895.
Staggering.
What?
Yeah, I know, that's what I said when I got it. $98.95. The explanation that I received is these things, the way they're manufactured and when they're done, when they're purchased in bulk, such as by the developer or whatever, they're much less expensive, but to replace one is rather expensive.
They don't carry replacement parts?
Oh, there's no replacement part. You can't replace what was left of this.
Oh.
This one was down in pieces in the street.
Oh, the whole thing.
Yes. This
My-
is the only one, though, of, every other light is accounted for.
Yeah. So when we say the four-way stop, this is where Veneto and.
If you're entering, when you come to the stop sign, at the four-way stop,
Yeah.
it would be on your left.
Where
in that median.
where the roundabout is.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, no, where it would be, the big opening, right at Veneto, that four-way.
Yeah,
I think
Veneto
Clubhouse,
and
yes.
Pelican Preserve Boulevard.
Yes.
And it would be on your right at that point. So
If you're heading into the community.
Yes.
It would be on your left.
on your left.
And the
Okay.
median on your left when you came to the stop sign.
Okay. My suggestion on this one is that, Nancy, you didn't catch this, but this is a decorative light pole that costs $9,895 to replace. My suggestion would be that each of us, when you get the opportunity, drive by there
Yeah.
at night and see whether we really think that we need a $10,000
Yeah, no,
light
I
pole.
haven't had anyone come to me regarding that
Okay.
specific issue.
So
Yeah.
it's Pelican Preserve Boulevard in Benito.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, may I ask, Jason, the light pole on Bella Vista Drive that is still laying on the sidewalk?
FPL.
I know it's FPL, but
Yeah,
isn't there?
there are
work
numerous light poles throughout Pelican Preserve that
Okay.
are waiting, FPL. The last update that they've given us is they hope to have the majority of the light poles in the area done by the end of the year. With some of the ones that require more work, could take to the end of the first quarter of 2018.
How many are down?
I do not know the exact count. I could get it for you, but I
No,
don't
I was
know
just
it.
curious.
Most of them are just leaning though, aren't they, rather than down?
Yeah, we have leaning or just out from damage, but there are,
Yeah.
a few that are down. They were
Yeah.
on. We did get them to come out and shut the power off to them, but that's all they did when they came out.
Well, that helped the landscapers who
Yeah,
are
I thank you
standing
for
in
doing
knee-deep
that.
water.
Got it the next day, thank you.
So as I say, I would suggest that we.
Revisit this?
Yeah, that we revisit that one after we've had a chance to look at it.
And
Uh,
tell me again, what corner it's on?
It's on Veneto and.
Veneto and Pelican Preserve
Pelican Preserve
Boulevard.
Okay.
On the left hand,
If you're coming in the median on your left.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, one other thing that, and Nancy, you're aware of this as I am and Jason is, that came up, and Jason, I think maybe we just have to have you check with Ryan and
Oh.
his people.
Yes.
And that has to do with, there was an incident where a woman, I guess she was handicapped, her golf cart broke down, and she tried to get the security vehicle, which says courtesy vehicle, to drive her someplace. And she was told that we don't do that kind of thing, and I think that we'd just be curious as to, I suspect maybe this is a liability issue for you folks.
Oh, most definitely.
Uh-huh.
We have a standard practice is we don't allow anyone else in the
In the car,
vehicle.
okay.
Our insurance just,
Doesn't
have
allow
an
it.
issue with that,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Would we expect them to maybe call somebody for her though? I mean,
Yes, I would think absolutely that they would go out of their way to try to help them find
Yeah.
a ride.
we can find out if they did that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is something that they should do. I would think
they should do, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, they have a cell phone there with the vehicle, so they can absolutely call and try to, reach a spouse or neighbor or something like that.
To come
And
in.
if not, then I can absolutely bring that to the attention of the staff, that they
Okay.
should try and do things like that
We'll find
as
out
well.
if they did that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay. We go on to number 9, bond update regarding claim on funds. Nancy, that's your
yeah.
baby.
I had a discussion last week with Danny Nelson, Tony Perez, and David Lapidus, who's the bond counsel. They are anxious to close out the bond. And we need to encourage Bob to make sure that he gets his business accounted for. I think he's gotten a lot of it accounted for, but he needs to complete that. Bob has probably about 150,000, 180,000 still left to pull out of the bond. And I think he's got the assets to reimburse, so that we're reimbursed for. WCI, it's been a year and it's not made a claim on theirs. And Danny, I haven't heard back, but Danny did contact David Caldwell to find out what their issue is. If it turns out that WCI is no longer interested in making a claim for their funds, there is a possibility that we can go through a fifth engineer's report and give us a little more time to put ponds or infrastructure requests through. If Stephen and Danny and everybody will approve what we might suggest are infrastructure improvements that need to be reimbursed. So it's possible that we could tap a little more, but we don't know where WCI stands, WCI Lennar stands at this point. But given the fact that it's down considerably from the $1 million we started with, a little over $1 million, and it's been a year since that case was approved, everybody's anxious to just kind of close this out.
What's the maximum amount we think that Lennar could claim?
There's a little more depreciation probably from where it was a year ago. It's not a significant amount, but WCI had, I think it was either 220 or 230
Okay.
a year ago that they said they needed to be reimbursed for. And that was the case that went in front of the board.
Ellen, they needed to show proof of that reimbursement of some type? Is that what they're waiting for, or
They need to make a request.
that's all?
And they'd have to have something
Valid.
behind
Yeah,
it,
a valid-
but a lot of that was already talked about earlier, but anyway. So the ball started to roll here to get
Get it wrapped up.
up.
Okay. Any other questions of Nancy? Okay, we're more on GSCDD board meeting report. I think you have written reports. Any questions on the reports? Okay, not. Ponds Work Group, Mr. Geppert is not here, so I guess we're not gonna have too much of a Ponds Work Group report. I would say that, and this was mentioned at the president's meeting this morning, and Bob had shown me a copy of it, that the Bonita Springs had a flood report done, and it's quite a comprehensive document, and the Ponds Group may be looking to have the CDD do some kind of a similar study that would start to look at what are the things we can do to lessen the impact of flooding impact in an event like Hurricane Irma.
Was a copy sent?
I've seen it, and we had
Yeah.
a presentation by two engineers.
Yep.
The first board meeting after the hurricane, which was a very similar product that you saw that they did for Bonita.
Uh-huh,
And where
okay.
we've taken that now and actually started today is, we have extreme divers using a remote vehicle, and they're starting at the culverts at Tree Line and Colonial,
Mhm.
moving over to the slough, the culverts going under Tree Line, the ones going under I-75, and then the 484-inch ones, and checking all those for any obstructions, any silting, that type of thing.
Mhm.
And also have a surveyor that's going in and establishing new benchmarks, and as building the structures that are in the system now to see if they were built according to permit, what the elevations are. And then we'll go to the Water Management District with that information and see if we can install some structures where we can lower the water levels pre-storm.
Mhm.
So we're moving forward and getting the data that we need and elevation information.
Would some of that include replacing the Pelican weir with a one that goes up and down instead of our cement weir?
Yeah, that's possible. That's
Okay.
one of the things we're looking at right now. The whole system's gravity operated, and besides Gateway Greens, there are no adjustments in the system that can be made. So, and
Yes,
that's
I
what you
think,
look
I
at.
think the point is we are looking at what are the possibilities of things we can do to make something like that less severe under those same
And
conditions.
part of that too is like you're doing, you get a formal stormwater basin cleaning where you're
Mhm.
doing it on a regular basis, and when you're inspecting it, you may find that out of 100, there's really only 30 that end up with problems.
Mhm.
You know, so you address those, but it needs to be on a regular
Mhm.
schedule, not
Mhm.
on after a storm, everyone screams and no one remembers anything about
Mhm.
it.
One of the things that, and I don't know, I assume you're aware of it, but one of the things that I learned recently is that Lee County has also started some kind of a study. I don't know how similar it is to Bonita, but they have started to do a study too, and that would be something probably to tap into.
We're doing that, working with them, and also looking at the condition of the slough over there in 6 Mile and see if it's being properly maintained. You know, if it's silted in, and I also just recently joined the county mitigation group
Okay.
that meets and looks at opportunities there to take action before the storm. It also helps you get on a priority list for federal reimbursement after the storm because you're participating in that group.
Chris, some of the ponds in Gateway that the money's been budgeted to try to fix, are their levels due to not correct, that they have to do dredging?
We're getting some bathymetrics done on the ponds we're moving into next. They didn't do that on the existing ponds, but we'd have to see when that, you know, we pull that data to find out.
So if the ponds aren't the correct depth, would that also help in some of the flooding issues?
Could. And you also look at, right now, we're having some off-site impacts, water that's coming into the gateway system
Right.
from the airport parcel across the street that
Right.
we need to address, and also from the school site. The school board will be in at the next board meeting next Thursday, and they're gonna make a presentation on the new school, and I asked them to bring an engineer with them because there's some issues regarding the drainage, and also on the backside where we had some water ponding up severely and moving into the backside of Cypress K and Stony Brook.
I mean, was Pelican Preserve aware of the airport situation, of the water coming in?
No,
I mean, was this new to everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I don't think
Is that a
they-
result of the way that, I mean, something new at the airport that it caused?
No, what they did is they initially put in some ditching on the side of Daniels when they installed Daniels Road from
Okay.
82. And for drainage on that, they installed culverts on each side of the road and some, drainage. And what happens is the airport property across the street, all that vacant, it's about 300 acres, is at 25 feet, and our elevation's at 24.
Right.
So I went out there right after the storm, and we threw some floating objects in across the street and watched it come right over, and